Welcome everyone to this panel session on how your cybersecurity program fits into governance, risk, and compliance. So is there anyone in the room who doesn't know what GRC stands for? Governance, risk, and compliance. That's good. Has anyone in the room not had exposure to a GRC program, or is part of a GRC program, or is just really wants a little bit of more meat and color around that? Everybody's good? All right, I just wanted to level set. So what we're going to be doing now is using a series of questions, and really only 3 questions, and would love to get really good audience participation. So although we have a panel, as each question unfolds, let's all talk about what's going on in your world and what's important to you, so that we can get down and dirty on a few of these concepts. What we've seen, of course, over the years is the emergence of cybersecurity as a separate discipline under the umbrella of security, and becoming orthogonal to information technology. It's not part of information technology so much. Security is built into the fabric of everything we do in all of our processes. And cybersecurity is even another discipline within that. So it's sometimes hard to get a sense of what is cybersecurity, and it's been very much a silo in and of its own right for some years. But over the last year or so, with the advent of cybercrime and some of the things that we've seen in terms of different attack vendors and in terms of resilience, DDoS attacks, and so on, we see that cybersecurity programs are requiring more contextual relevance. So generally speaking, governance, risk, and compliance programs will provide that context. So if we think about the organizational structure and the fact that governance, risk, and compliance programs need to define out what are the processes in a company, what are the products and services, what's the risk hierarchy, how those risks are mapped to controls, mitigating controls, how the controls are mapped to common controls that may be associated with policies or with regulations or best practices like NIST or ISO or whatever. Then that starts to paint a picture, a world of context, of content, and the actual information architecture that's important for a GRC program. And cyber can use that. Cyber can leverage that. So right now, cyber programs are pretty much into cyber, and they're looking at what's coming in at various levels of the network and the application infrastructure. They're looking at attack vectors. They may be doing some kill chain analysis. They'll be doing anomaly detection and working with IT systems and monitoring systems to look at correlation and so on, and try to trap stuff that is happening and stop bad things from happening. But when they open their context to include, oh, something's coming in through this vector, and it looks like it's an outside actor with a high skill level, oh my gosh, it's targeting a high valued asset, which is sitting on top of, the BCM people know this. They've done a business impact analysis. The risk intelligence people know that that this is a new account opening and it's E-Trade, and if it goes down for more than an hour, it's going to be X billions of dollars and millions of dollars of lost revenue and so on. So the speed with which we respond in a cybersecurity event needs to be in the context of a larger set of factors that have to be available at machine speed. And in GRC, we're not operating at machine speed, but we do have the contextual relevance. So something is happening in the convergence of these two disciplines, so that cyber that operates at machine speed and GRC that operates at human speed can join forces and perform better. Does that make sense? Now, how many of you are seeing this happening in your organizations? from a vision point of view, let's just take it from a vision point of view. Do people get this? Is there an awareness that there needs to be this kind of correlation? Yeah? Instead of, let's put our hands up. Because the people behind you can't see you nodding. 2.
All right, we have 2, 3. 3, 2.
Let's go for 4.
Yeah,
We've got some shaking heads. Okay. How many of you believe that that is where we should be going? Yeah, okay. So this is, you're in your organization, so, you know, you could be secret agents of change and start making that happen. It's possible. So this is what the panel is really discussing today, is why does cybersecurity need to be part of a GRC program or leverage a GRC program in your organization? And we have myself moderating and helping get you guys going and talking. We have this auspicious panel. My name is Yo Delmar, and I'm the Vice President of Customer Programs at MetricStream. I've been with MetricStream for about nearly 5 years, in GRC space for 10 or 12 years, in the IT industry for decades, and we're not going to talk about how many. But I grew up in IT and then fell in love with network security. I don't know, about 15 years ago or so, I joined Skybox Security. Anybody know Skybox? and fell in love with network risk management, and then moved my way through to EGRC. But grew up in IT.
So I spilled some egg.
So I'm delighted to be here. And we have with us here 3 wonderful panel members. And I'll start with Richard Steinen. Richard Steinen. We're making a huge correction now.
Yeah. Rewire your brain.
Yeah. Richard Steinen. Could you take a few minutes to introduce yourself, Richard?
Sure, very happy to, Yo. So I'm currently the Chief Strategy Officer at Blanco Technology, which is a company that does secure data erasure. So you can think about where that fits in GRC. It's the low rung of what you have to think about with data security. But for the last 17 years, I was an industry analyst in the cybersecurity arena. Back before we called it cyber anything. It used to be called IT security. Got my start as an analyst working with French at Gartner. And I take a very, I definitely am the cyber silo, right? So GRC is something that as an engineer always freaked me out because there seemed to be a lot of meetings and a lot of people voting on risk metrics and assigning values, and it was kind of a democratic process, and it freaks out any engineer when they have to sit through that. So my journey to this panel, includes being in executive roles where you start to see the break between what the cybersecurity team is doing and the governance requirements, let alone compliance, because the upper management, the board, really needs to know what's happening in that part of their business, and it's very difficult to communicate that to them. So I'm learning that part as I go.
Excellent. And then we're going to move to Anne.
I'm Ann Bader, and I'm currently the founder of the International Cybersecurity Dialogue, which actually Richard and I founded, me being the policy side, he being the tech side, to promote better understanding of differing perspectives of what's wrong and what's right about cybersecurity. So we have legislation that makes sense, we have insurance underwriting that makes sense, we have everything that makes sense, and we have the need to understand how it's all fitting together.
And our chief evangelist at MetricStream, French Calvo.
I'm just the GRC guy on this panel. Now, I got accidentally pulled into cybersecurity many years ago when I was at Gartner, and I was asked to sit on a cybersecurity panel by another colleague of ours, Bill Malik. And on the panel also was Richard Clark, who was then the sort of counterterrorism czar in the Bush 1 White House. And at the end of our panel, which was discussing sort of cyber attacks, from a strategic standpoint, Richard asked, "Is such a thing even possible?" This was after the panel. I said, "Well, I really don't know, but I have a friend who's a former sort of terrorism expert. If there's anything like cyber terrorism, maybe he'll know about it. And I called him up, and he was the academic dean of the Naval War College. And he was on a panel here the other day, Charles Niemeyer. And I said, Charlie, what about, this new concern over cyber terrorism? It was right after 2001. He said, I don't even know if a strategic cyber attack is possible. Why don't we just see if we can create one? And so we used the Naval War College's facilities for wargaming, and under the sponsorship of the White House, and brought together 120 experts on different aspects of critical infrastructure, CIOs and subject matter experts who own the systems, and some analysts from Gartner. And we, interestingly enough, at that time, I don't know if you were part of Gartner then, but
I was part of Gartner.
Oh, okay.
But I was part of the other silo, and we didn't like what you were doing.
You did not like what we were doing, exactly. So I was over in sort of risk management side of things, and the IT security people there didn't even like the term cyber. They thought, oh, why are you doing that? IT security is IT security, and so on. And so the whole idea that we wanted to create a term that had strategic implications, and that you could even consider doing a strategic cyber attack, was anathema to the IT security people at the time. We ran the game anyway, and we had had a few IT security guys there, and a lot of people who owned the IT systems and networks for critical infrastructure. And in 3 days, we created the strategy and proved that it was possible to do a strategic cyber attack on the United States. But we also proved that at that time it wasn't possible by a terrorist group to do it. It would take a nation state, and probably still would. It was, for strategic cyber attacks. Terrorists can do some nasty things, as we've seen with cyber criminals recently, with ransomware attacks. They can do some nasty things, but it's not strategic, and that it doesn't shift the balance of power. But I would say the big trend these days around cybersecurity is that the term resonates with the board, because in a way that IT security doesn't, because it does connotate the link to the objectives of the organization, the strategic impact of IT security and the threats and IT risk, the strategic impact that they can have on your ability to achieve your business objectives. And so that term, in and of itself, has now been widely adopted by the IT security professionals, because they realize that, and many of them...
It's a better brand.
Well, it's a better brand, but many of them don't want a better brand. Many of them do not really want to be up there, but those who are thinking more strategically, like Richard, thinks very strategically, and he probably would have been a great asset at BPH. But those who are doing that and want to make that linkage of IT investment to the board and the need to manage all the risk associated with that investment really have adopted the term. But cybersecurity now is definitely real, and cyber attacks, strategic level cyber attacks are real. I think, Richard, you were telling me about one that's probably more legend than reality, right? On the Siberian pipeline many years ago.
Oh, I think it's true.
Yeah,
It's not a
there's a lot of
conspiracy
people who debate that, but there's another one that happened during the Serbian
and that
war,
really did happen.
which is definitely, and the reason that the Serbian, you might assume the Serbian is legend, this attack on the Serbian gas pipeline is legend versus this Siberian gas attack is legend versus the Serbian attack as being real, is because you can't find out anything about the Serbian attack, except for there's one mention that is open source, one tiny mention, and I'm sure if the people that don't want these things done could find that one mention easily, they'd probably wipe it out too. But whereas this Siberian one, you find all kinds of information about, right? So when you get into these strategic type cyber attacks, you run into all kinds of secrecy. One of the magics of Digital Pearl Harbor, though, is that we actually published all of it, every bit of it.
Right.
And it went through a national security review by the Naval War College, and they allowed us to publish everything we did.
You can read about Digital Pearl Harbor, which is this exercise that French did. You can just Google it, and you can get all kinds of good information on it. Quite an exercise. And what year was that?
Well, it's 2002, and there have
Yeah.
been several more done since by different groups.
So
Right.
this century.
Yeah.
Definitely. So let's move on. Thank you for that background. I'd like to also, challenge this notion that cybersecurity programs need GRC and need to be part of the convergence of the resilience convergence that actually French covered in the previous session of business continuity, crisis management, risk management coming together at a different level. GRC providing this umbrella contextual environment where you can see what risks are associated with what business processes and services in what geographies in what parts of the organization associated with what technology assets, and then cyber coming throughout this entire ecosystem with high priority attacks. I'd like to challenge how that can actually work. Is there any company that has really done this? Are there companies that are on the path to doing this? And Richard has a special example that he likes to talk about, Lockheed. How many of you have heard of the kill chain? So the kill chain was invented by Lockheed probably 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, quite a time ago. And they've done quite a bit to do exactly what we're talking about. So Richard, do you want to tell a story about what's gone on at Lockheed and why it is integrated with GRC in this way?
Sure, and let's go back even further in time to just to illustrate the evolution of everybody's thinking in large organizations. Because back in that 2002, 2003 timeframe, setting up a good IT security program meant being very reactive and responding to the growth of the spread of malware. So as viruses and worms were the driving factor then. And I always had my eyes open for companies that were doing a good job of that. And back then I found the oil and gas industry was the best, right? They they had their firewalls locked down. They had deployed their IDS systems and actually monitored their logs. And they did good desktop protection, and they tried to keep separate from the rest of the internet, so they didn't get exposed to all these worms. And of course, fast forward to today, and they're the ones that are probably at highest risk of new sophisticated attacks. We won't get into that. But as the attacks evolved to nation-state style attacks with massive resources behind them, most organizations fell way behind. They were essentially wide open to any extremely targeted attack. And of course, the Defense Industrial Base had their wake-up call when basically all the design information for 10 very, very critical weapon systems were stolen by nation-state attackers, China. It included the THAAD missile system, the Aegis missile system, the Littoral Combat Ship, and the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter made by Lockheed. And the Pentagon got all those suppliers in a room, and they said, this can't ever happen again. We're going to change how that happens. And that was kind of the birth of information sharing, where they created the DIB in order to do that threat information sharing, because they all suffered attacks from the same threat actors. So then in 2010, this amazing attack occurred against RSA, the security division of EMC. And I was writing a book called Surviving Cyber War at the time, and I figured, well, I've got to have a really good introductory, chapter that describes a really, really good attack, and that was a really good attack. So through a supplier of human resource benefits, RSA received an email with an attachment which had the spreadsheet of the proposed benefit package, et cetera, to just the team that was working on that benefit package. And about 10 people received it, 5 people opened it, 3 people actually got infected with a remote access Trojan, a rat. And from there, the attackers worked laterally and eventually stole the secret seeds to the secure ID tokens. So I've always found it fascinating because in the geeky world of security, cracking secure ID tokens was always one of the holy grails, and everybody had tried, and there are various methods that usually involve putting the device in a microwave and exposing it to microwaves, and it would somehow give up its secret seed but destroy the token. So there were a lot of papers written on how to do this. So it's real obvious that if you had the secret seeds, you were golden and you could spoof any secure ID token. And sure enough, the attackers were actually after that file. I imagine it was a spreadsheet, with 30 million secure ID tokens in it. And we're able to extract it, probably 50% of it. The RSA has a fabulous team. They saw the file being exfiltrated. It was like midnight, and the guy saw it going.
On a Friday night.
On a Friday night, he literally hit a button and shut off RSA from the internet to stop that exfiltration. And of course, what in the industry, this case is really used as an example of how to handle a crisis, and RSA did a fabulous job. They stayed in business. They retained most of their customers. They communicated. The initial post to their website from their chief counsel was the likelihood of, not to worry because the likelihood of this being used to compromise our customers is extremely low. So, a good opportunity to criticize, risk assessments, right? Because you don't know what the attackers are actually doing with the things that they're after. And in this case, they didn't even know the attackers were interested in that particular file. So they weren't doing the data governance side of the task. So they had the silos. But almost a month to the day later, Lockheed Martin notices that somebody was logging in with a spoofed credential from RSA, a remote login. And Lockheed recognized that and shut off access for remote logins to 80,000 people. We learned about it because they had to communicate that with 80,000 people, and it leaked to the press. And of course, in my head, I'm going, wait a minute, how do you detect a spoofed login attack from somebody with a secure ID token like that? And it's a legitimate two-factor, strong authentication. This is what we deployed. We know who owns that one. How in the world did they know it was malicious? So I had to go see. And so I go into Lockheed, and this is why I still hold them up as example of the best security program, in that they were constantly tracking these attacks and fingerprinting them and cataloging them. So they knew IP addresses, methodologies, and they would name the attacking groups. So we learned nowadays everybody calls them APTs and assigns a number to them. But Lockheed just made up a name. I remember seeing on the board one called Cheesy Fingers. And they would track that, and then they'd be able to report. And this is where the CISO at the time was so good, because she came from the GRC world. She was creating metrics that she could report to the board. She showed them a dashboard every single week that tracked each of these attack campaigns and how far they had gotten into the organization based on the cyber kill chain. So, the reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, travel, exfiltration, etc. That's how they would track it. And at that point, just the bells went off in my head, and I saw the light. This is how you communicate with a board. When a board sees that there's a named threat actor, gives it a little personality that they can describe deeper if needed, is actually making and consistently coming back. First, they try sending 100 emails to low-level employees, and that's caught by the email security program and the AV. And then they try sending Facebook links, as happened to Google during the famous Google Aurora attack that same year. and this escalation that happens, because when a targeted attack is defined by somebody already knowing what they want, and they will stop at nothing to get it. And all your defenses are there to slow them down as much as you possibly can, and force them eventually to saying, you know what, we have to, hire somebody to infiltrate your organization, and then your physical security and your background checks play such an important role there, and your monitoring of employees. But that was the first time I'd seen metrics that were going beyond risk, but to governance as well, that were applied well. And to this day, we haven't heard of any other Lockheed breaches that have happened.
Right, and Lockheed's done a lot to add to our industry as Intel with the first, threat matrices and definition of threat sources, et cetera. So thank you, Richard. And Anne, could you tell me a little bit from a think tank point of view where you see this? You've been driving this cybersecurity think tank for a while and looking at...
It's really an LLC now. It's not a...
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, certainly having an impact on regulations
Yes.
and so on. How do you see this transformation happening? Because the penny is dropping. We're kind of at a stage, this probably started last year. It'll probably go on for a couple more years where the implications of this convergence will start to play out in companies' programs. So where do you see this happening?
I see this as a map.
No, you need to...
Real close.
Yeah, we just need to turn it on.
Just hold it real close here.
Oh, cool. I hate microphones. From my point of view, it's all about having people understand and absorb a concept, how everything is connected. We're all told everything is connected. How many of us really know what that means? How many of us have mapped a supply chain and seen where cybersecurity can inflict vulnerability? Anybody here done that? Yeah. And would you like to give me your reaction to that? Did that help you?
Just a second.
Hello. It was a very interesting exercise. I mean, the more that we dug into it and the more that we got different people engaged in that process, the more surprises came up.
But what's it done for your program?
Well, I mean, we now have some new plumbing that we go through, a little bit more due diligence every time we kind of grow our third-party network out a little bit, and we're tracking those issues.
Explain that you're from Commerce.
Who are you?
Oh yeah, I'm from Commerce Hub. We're in the e-commerce vertical. We market to online retailers and their suppliers.
Yes. So you're hugely influential in the potential success of this approach.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because we've had the Targets, we've had the Best Buys, we've had all these embarrassments.
Yep.
We've got to get over it, folks. And I've heard so many of this week people attending saying that the compartmentalization is so difficult bureaucratically, politically, financially to get over. And the first thing that what really has inspired me to follow, and I'm not being paid to say this, MetricStream, is they've created a technology-based GRC approach which forces everybody to go through from the top of the list to the board all the way down to the receptionist. You're reminded, you have accountability, you have education, you have, now I'm making a little bit of this up because I haven't seen demos, but the technology support of this has really created for the first time in my mind, and I don't know if it's just MetricStream, but I know MetricStream, so that everybody who needs to know knows, and everybody who needs to be a decision maker understands where they fit. If you look at a military organization, you don't have this problem. They understand the context of engagement. Some people are responsible in the front line, but they also have authority to do certain things. If somebody gets hurt, they have the authority to, call for help. This doesn't occur in enough major multinationals, and that's what makes, in my view, makes it so difficult to get beyond reaction. You get dysfunctional after reacting a while. So when I look internationally, because we operate internationally, I do a lot with a lot of different countries. So what they need to know is, how much do I need to know? How much authority do I need to have? How does this all fit? who's liable, who's accountable, what happens to them. And still in the world of cybersecurity, that's not too clear. We have no international standards. What you're seeing now, I do a newsletter every week, just looking at what's working over the last year. Nations are putting regulatory controls in. Laws are people are being prosecuted. China and New York have got a very similar cybersecurity set of laws now, which probably doesn't make me very popular with either, but but it's happening because it's coming to people. They're realizing finally, context is critical. You have to see a whole picture and understand where the problems are, and we're not there yet. One of the things I think MetricStream, and offers the community is this ability to see the whole picture. And the supply chain mapping is another approach. But then you've got to make your changes. You've got to the board needs to realize they're fiscally responsible and can be prosecuted if they don't do a good job. And people need to be prosecuted. I get a little hard-lined. So that's about it.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to turn to the audience now and get some feedback on this. Is there anyone who would like to comment on what's going on in their organization or what they've seen in other organizations that show that there's some work being done, the foundations being laid, the concepts being addressed? Is there anyone who would like to offer a story here? Okay.
I certainly would say, inside of MetricStream, our CTO has certainly been stressing cybersecurity very effectively, and it's a kind of a surprise because I think when I joined, MetricStream 3 years ago, it was nowhere near where it is now, and we've been through a lot of had to go through a lot of certification hoops around different ISO standards. ISO 27001, his latest initiative is to ensure that we meet the governmental standards, FISMA compliance, for instance. Since a lot of agencies, even though FISMA doesn't necessarily apply to you as a vendor, you still need to be able to meet the standards and prove that you have the right controls in place for the agency that has to comply with FISMA. And of course, all of our customers come to us with their security controls and as a cloud vendor to ensure that we're meeting those. So we finally said, we really need instead of trying to meet all of these things ad hoc, we need to have sort of a standard approach to ensure that we're able to comply with all these different security rules and be able to be a little bit more proactive. Sometimes it gets a little bit annoying, having all of your ports on your MetricStream laptop, shut down, your USB ports. You kind of understand that though, if you have professional services people who are going into customer organizations and they're bringing in their laptop. The customers certainly don't want MetricStream people as contractors walking out with data that's really proprietary to them. And so, these types of things you have to tolerate. But I tell you, it is absolutely critical to our business objectives that we have good security. If you don't have good security, then it can really, first of all, our customers are demanding it, so we won't get business. If you have an incident, then it damages your reputation, which means you won't get business. When Forrester came in and was talking to us on an internal presentation just a couple of months ago, and Chris McLean for Forrester pulled up a slide about the damage from data breach. And 6% of the cost associated with a data breach actually deals with, the actual breach itself and remediating the breach. And that was their estimate. So when you're looking at the Ponemon Institute's reports on the cost of a data breach, you're really looking at somewhere around 6% of the cost. And the rest of that ends up being damage to brand and reputation and lost business as a consequence of that. So, I think you have to make this link, and we've certainly made the direct link within our company, of cybersecurity to business. And not just meeting the standards, but looking at what does it take to be a real security company. There was no customer standard, no ISO standard, nothing that told us, recently to say, hey, you really have to look at the use of WebEx personal rooms because once someone gets the URL, they can go and check back into your personal room whenever they want to. So, things like that don't come out in the ISO standard. But imagine if your employees are using the personal room to share, for their sessions, for their meetings around the world, where they're actually putting up on the screen source code and things like that they're walking through. So you have to, some of these things, just because you're compliant with all your customers' requirements, you're compliant with all the standards, doesn't really mean that you have the right linkage of security to your business goals and objectives. It doesn't mean you're secure, right?
So I wanted to use the example that more and more, as the insurance industry starts to be a little less risk averse and come in and underwrite these, and they of course have to understand what French has just been talking about, the total valuation of these items, but it's already affecting the business community at large. For example, Verizon downgraded its offer to Yahoo once they had that second breach and they didn't announce it. And it's becoming accepted in the insurance industry, which to me is the beginning of the process of making the case for better laws, better understanding of context and how everything fits together and influences. And they are now saying that the insurance is vastly different. For example, in the UK, AIG is working with the UK, with GCHQ, which is their NSA, and the UK Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which isn't the right name, but anyway, and requiring small and middle-sized businesses. Multinationals are already doing this, but the ones who are having trouble paying for all this are the small and middle-sized. They need to go through certification programs now. They need to require continuing education. And once they have certification, AIG is giving them a 20% discount on their insurance. And that's what we like to see happen. They're already doing it in India as well. So globally, these things are starting to catch on, but each of you has the bureaucracies of your finance departments and your CEOs to deal with. And you have my sympathy, Sonny. I know how difficult it is.
We have about 10 minutes left.
Actually, I have to go shortly because our final session is starting, so we have less than 5 minutes left.
Okay, in this last 5 minutes, I'd just like to touch lightly on the key characteristics of a world-class cybersecurity program that in fact does work with a GRC program. Now, you all know about basic hygiene, so we've been doing the basics. Anne just talked about expertise. You have to continue to work on security awareness and so on. And you all know about proactive technologies, which have to do with anomaly detection and correlation and, really keeping on, trying to get ahead of what might be happening from an attack surface point of view. And the concept of security by design. Let's not bolt things on after, let's build things in from the beginning and understand our ecosystem. Those are certainly 4 areas that you are all aware of as security professionals. But the emerging aspects of a world-class program really have to do with artificial intelligence. And I'd like each of our panel members to just comment on that, 1 or 2 minutes each, and also give a call to action. So if there is one thing that they would suggest you do to start building the bridges between cyber and GRC, what would that be? So what's happening from an emerging point of view? Where are we going? And then what is the best way, the one thing that you would suggest to get there?
Okay, but first, artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence today in cybersecurity isn't necessarily about decision making and some sort of human replacement for response. Today, it's simply machine learning applied to big data sets. But we're seeing it already. There's a well-known company, Silence, on the endpoint that does that for file artifacts, basically. And then there's a completely unknown company, which I happen to be an investor in, full disclosure, called TrustPipe that does it for network connections.
And then there's some work at MIT, which is using AI, and it's shown that there's an 85% up in performance,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Of identifying attacks. And that is called AI2 from MIT, if you want to Google that.
So, but my one takeaway, of key things to do, if you have fewer than 50,000 employees, I don't think you're going to get to where Lockheed is today. They've got 80,000 employees, but they also have a huge IT staff. You have to outsource something called MDR, Managed Detection and Response, because you will not be able to build your own ability to manage 24/7 the attacks that are coming against you. So you have to outsource that to somebody who can coalesce the expertise round the clock and follow the sun with multiple socks around the world.
We all have
Yes,
to.
go.
We all have to
Okay.
go.
Well,
Applause
thank
the
you so much.
I got the last word.
Closing
All right,
note is
you did get
happening.
the last word. I
All
want to
right.
thank all of you today. Let's all go to the big tent, and we'll have our closing remarks.